The light in the grand conclave of the Krill Imperium was not light in the terrestrial sense. It was a structured luminescence, filtered through crystalline lattices grown over millennia from the compressed heart minerals of their homeworld, casting long, severe shadows across the obsidian floor where the delegates stood. A profound silence, heavy and resonant with the accumulated weight of 10,000 years of uncontested dominion, pressed down upon the assembled high echelon. Before the central dais, where the triumvir of the conclave sat inert, a holographic projection flickered, a single crude image captured from the periphery of the last intercepted probe. A bipedal shape, small, fragile, its features rendered indistinct by atmospheric interference, yet radiating an unsettling tenacity even in its crude representation. The air, thick with the pheromonal scent of controlled anxiety emitted by the assembled Krill nobility, barely stirred. "Report on the anomaly," intoned the delegate of Sector Purity, Krill Prime Vorlag, his voice a low, grinding resonance amplified by the acoustic properties of the chamber. His carapace, polished to a deep, light-absorbing black, reflected none of the ambient glow, making him seem like a void in the very fabric of the room. The designation, humanity, remains provisional. Their arrival in the fringe sectors was not an invasion, nor a trade mission, but an accidental intrusion during a navigational failure. We contained the primary vessel. The secondary vessel, carrying the designated specimen, was secured. Another voice higher-pitched, steeped in the brittle arrogance of the core world's intellectual caste, cut through the stillness. This was Scholar Delegate Rylos, whose cranial ridges housed processing nodes capable of simulating entire stellar collapses in moments. "Contained, yes, but not understood, Vorlag. Understanding is paramount to containment. Their structure is baffling. Carbon-based, reliant on volatile liquid solvents for metabolic function, possessing rudimentary FTL capabilities that defy our current comprehension of subspace manipulation efficiency. Their very existence is an insult to predictable astrophysics." Rylos shifted, his multifaceted eyes focusing on the projection with an almost clinical revulsion. "And the specimen, the single biological sample recovered from the derelict scout craft. What intelligence have we extracted?" A third figure, the arbiter of interstellar justice, shifted slightly, the movement barely perceptible but registering as significant in the tense atmosphere. Arbiter Vex was responsible for the philosophical integrity of Krill expansion, the why of their rule. "The extraction process was flawed. We relied upon established protocols for sensory overload and cognitive mapping. The specimen resisted all known forms of non-lethal coercion. It deteriorated internally before the primary cognitive matrix could be mapped." Vex paused, allowing the implication to settle like cosmic dust. "It died under interrogation." A ripple of cold realization passed through the assembly. Death was not failure in the Imperium, inefficiency was. The Krill dealt in submission, assimilation, or absolute, clean eradication. Allowing a specimen of a newly encountered species to expire before its fundamental nature was catalogued was a systemic error. Vorlag's resonance deepened, expressing a controlled fury that was far more frightening than an outburst. "Died, Arbiter, or refused to yield? Explain the discrepancy between the specimen's physical fragility and its psychological resistance. Our interrogation matrix is calibrated against species displaying resilience metrics up to the Thraxian standard, a species renowned for enduring millennia of solar flares. This human, short-lived, biochemically unstable, endured torture beyond the threshold of viable biological function for its size. Why?" Rylos leaned forward, his voice regaining its sharp, intellectual edge. "The data suggests a form of neurological reinforcement we have never before encountered. It appears to be driven not by the primal fear response or the instinct for species propagation, but by abstract concepts. Loyalty, principle. We bombarded it with stimuli designed to induce catastrophic systemic shutdown. It experienced pain far exceeding survivability, yet its final recorded neural activity indicated a spike correlating to what we tentatively translate as defiance. A purely emotional, resource-inefficient response." The conclave settled into a weighty silence, punctuated only by the low thrum of the core stabilizers deep beneath the structure. Humanity, in their brief, chaotic appearance on the edges of Krill space, presented a profound philosophical crisis. The Imperium based its security on the predictable application of overwhelming force and the predictable collapse of lesser species under calculated pressure. If this species possessed internal mechanisms that allowed them Oh, withstand existential agony for an abstract cause, then the calculus of conquest, the very foundation of Krill's superiority, was suddenly unstable. "We must initiate phase gamma," Vorlag declared, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Direct engagement. We will not tolerate an unknown variable operating within the fringe sectors. Their primary vessel, the one designated Hope by its occupants, a melodramatic nomenclature, must be brought to the core world for comprehensive disassembly and study. Dispatch the third probe's fleet. No communication, no parley, simply secure the asset." Rylos interjected, his voice strained. "But Vorlag, the energy signature of their drive systems, even the minimal readings we have, suggests they are utilizing entangled particle transfer for instantaneous course correction within conventional warp lanes. If they have scaled that technology, a direct confrontation with unshielded core assets could be devastating. They might be primitive, but their approach to physics is aggressively novel. We must observe their pattern of interaction, not immediately provoke an escalation." "Observation is a luxury we no longer possess, scholar," Vorlag countered, the deep reverberation in his voice suggesting a chilling resolve. "The very concept of a species capable of such raw, unyielding defiance, even in death, represents a potential contagion to our subservient populations. If word spreads that Krill interrogation can be defeated by mere will, the stability of the Imperial mandates collapses. The specimen's death was a consequence of its inherent uselessness to provide data. Now we must deal with the source. Immediate decisive action, prepare the fleet vectors." The holographic image of the small, broken, yet defiantly upright human figure remained projected in the center of the conclave, a tiny, burning ember in the overwhelming shadow of the Krill Empire, a beacon that promised either total subjugation or an unprecedented conflagration. The decision was made in that moment. The tentative study was over. The age of calculated risk had begun, predicated on the assumption that this fragile bipedal race was, fundamentally, weak. The Krill Third Probe's fleet was not designed for subtlety. It was an arrowhead of kinetic dominance, comprising dozens of capital vessels whose hulls were layered with reactive armor designed to absorb and dissipate energy discharges equivalent to solar flares. Their approach vectors, calculated by the highest orbital dynamics models the Imperium possessed, were designed to encircle the human vessel, the Odyssey, isolating it before any potentially disruptive energy discharge could occur. Inside the Odyssey, nestled deep within the protective shielding of the primary engineering core, Captain Eva Rostova watched the sensor readings coalesce. She did not display the fear that coursed like a chilled current through the veins of her bridge crew. Her expression was a mask of absolute, terrifying serenity, honed over years of navigating the ethical abyss of deep space exploration, where one misstep meant the eradication of everything humanity held sacred. "Status update, Lieutenant Commander Chen." Eva's voice was quiet, perfectly modulated against the rising tension alarms. It was a sound of absolute control, the sound of an anchor dropped into turbulent water. Chen, her face illuminated by the frantic pulsing of the tactical displays, swallowed hard. "Contact confirmation, Captain. It's the Krill Third Fleet, exactly as predicted, though their deployment profile is denser than anticipated. They are deploying a containment field precursor, a slow-burn kinetic dampener designed to shear off warp field integrity. We have approximately 20 standard minutes before localized subspace cohesion fails completely." 20 minutes to negotiate with an entity that has already executed one of our scientific team," Eva murmured, the words not rhetorical, but a simple, cold statement of fact. The fate of Dr. Aris Thorne still haunted the operational parameters of the Odyssey. They knew the Krill had detained Aris after the initial, unauthorized excursion near the Krill perimeter marker, an excursion meant to verify the stability of their warp transit calculations. Aris had been returned physically, but his sentience had been systematically dismantled, his biological shell returned as a warning. The memory of that ruined mind, catalogued by medical staff as a violation of fundamental consciousness, was the true casus belli, unspoken but acutely felt by every soul aboard. "Tactical team readiness?" Eva asked, turning her attention to Commander Jax, whose specialization was xenolinguistics and low-yield kinetic response. "We are ready, Captain. The payload is secured. We have calculated the precise resonant frequency required to disrupt their primary shield harmonics without causing catastrophic structural failure to the Krill flagship. It is a surgical strike, Ray. Requiring absolute precision on deployment. If we miss the window, or if the krill deploy adaptive countermeasures faster than anticipated, we are vaporized instantly. Jax's voice held a grim professionalism, devoid of bravado. They understood the odds were astronomical. "We are not here to vaporize them, Commander," Eva corrected gently, her eyes flicking to the main view screen where the vast, incomprehensible scale of the krill fleet began to resolve from hyperspace distortions. A terrifying assemblage of dark, angular mass, radiating silent, ancient authority. "We are here to communicate a boundary. They have violated an unspoken law of sentience. They have tortured one of ours. We present the invoice." Ensign Davies, the junior communications officer, spoke up hesitantly. "Captain, I am receiving a burst transmission, non-standard encryption, but clearly originating from their lead vessel. It's a declarative statement. They are demanding immediate surrender of the vessel and designation of a single representative for assimilation." Eva nodded slowly. "Translate, Ensign, verbally. Do not transmit a reply until I give the order." Davies ran the low-level translation matrix, the krill language, a complex system of tonal shifts and resonant frequencies, being rendered into rough Terran English through the ship's processing core. It translates roughly, Captain, as designation, humanity. Cease all unauthorized vectoring. Prepare for secure capture. Resistance is illogical and invites systemic deletion. Eva smiled, a faint, almost imperceptible curve of the lips that held no warmth, only the cold fire of conviction. "Illogical. That is what they fundamentally misunderstand. Prepare the primary communication channel. Open a direct link to their flagship, the Iron Sepulchre. I sense that is the vessel of the highest command." Chen looked up, horrified. "Captain, they will overload our transmission array the moment we open a channel. They expect submission, not a conversation." "They expect weakness disguised as arrogance, Commander. They expect shouting or begging. They will receive neither." Eva moved from her command chair, walking slowly toward the main tactical readout. "When we open the channel, the krill will see the same image they saw in their conclave. But this time it will be live. Commander Jax, prepare the environmental overlay. Show them exactly what they faced." The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal, yet it flowed from the core ethical framework that defined the species they represented. Never yield ground on principle, and always meet aggression with proportionate, inescapable logic, regardless of the immediate cost. In the Grand Conclave, the atmosphere curdled with anticipation as the krill fleet prepared its final maneuver. Triumvir Vorlag sat immobile, the projection of the lone human vessel Odyssey still visible, a speck of defiant light against the void. "The human vessel remains stationary," Vorlag intoned, directing his focus toward the arbiter. "They are paralyzed by fear, a predictable outcome." "Perhaps, Lord Triumvir," Vex replied cautiously, "but their containment failure during the initial probe retrieval suggested a tactical capability beyond simple fear response. Their technology is crude, but their application of it appears precise." Rylos, the scholar, interrupted, his voice tight with nervous excitement. "Captain Rostova has just opened a restricted channel. It is a direct transmission overriding standard hail protocols. They are attempting to force communication." A high-frequency whine filled the chamber as the Odyssey's signal bypassed the standard krill firewall protocols, a feat of electronic persistence that momentarily jarred the ancient systems. Then, the central projection shifted. It was no longer a static, grainy capture. It was a real-time feed, high definition, filling the conclave with an unexpected vibrancy. The krill beheld an environment meticulously constructed for survival, yet overlaid with signs of what they interpreted as extreme sentimentality. The walls of the human bridge were not utilitarian gray. They were lined with illuminated panels displaying complex, flowing mathematical expressions interspersed with what appeared to be abstract chromatic art. In the center stood the human female, Rostova. She was physically unimpressive by krill metrics, slender, lacking external reinforcement, clad in a simple, dark operational uniform. Yet her posture broadcast an authority that dwarfed the krill warships surrounding her. She did not flinch from the proximity of the enemy sensors. She stared directly into the optical sensors of the krill flagship, a connection that spanned light years and technological chasms. Then Commander Jax's environmental overlay activated on the human feed. It projected a complex, three-dimensional rendering of the medical bay of the Odyssey, a place the krill had never been permitted to see. They witnessed the image of Dr. Aris Thorne, not as he was when returned, but as he was immediately post-retrieval. Biomonitors screaming alarms, life support struggling to maintain the fragile architecture of his brain, the clear, deliberate dissection of his cognitive pathways visible on diagnostic screens. It was an act of staggering, cold-blooded aggression, displaying the evidence of their own violation, not as a plea, but as an exhibit. Eva Rostova spoke then, her voice clear, devoid of emotional inflection, yet carrying the undeniable resonance of immutable law. Krill Imperium. This is Captain Eva Rostova of the exploration vessel Odyssey, representing the human concordance. You have violated recognized interstellar precepts regarding the treatment of captured non-combatant scientific personnel. You extracted and deliberately destroyed the cognitive integrity of Dr. Aris Thorne, a breach of ethical conduct that warrants immediate, full systemic review. Rylos hissed audibly, a sound like sand pouring over metal. She is accusing us. They are displaying evidence of our successful interrogation. This is a display of submission. Vorlag remained unmoving, his attention fixed on Rostova. He recognized the trap. The humans were forcing the Krill to acknowledge the legitimacy of their ethical framework, even by displaying the evidence of the Krill's violation. Eva continued, her cadence measured, each word a precisely placed stone in a defensive wall. Your extraction process was designed to extract information through the application of calibrated suffering. The data logs confirm this. We do not perceive suffering as a means to yield actionable data, but as a fundamental violation of biological sovereignty. We have cataloged the methodology used upon Dr. Thorne. We have understood the intent. She paused, letting the weight of that simple statement, "We have understood the intent," settle. Your subsequent fleet mobilization, based upon the presumed weakness induced by this act of barbarity, is noted. We do not intend to engage in the kinetic exchange you anticipate. We have no interest in the eradication of your people, nor the conquest of your territories. Our interest is singular: restitution for the violation committed against a member of our species, and the establishment of an inviolable demarcation line. Arbiter Vex finally spoke, his voice echoing with an ancient, almost sorrowful disappointment. Restitution, primitive concepts of retribution are not compatible with galactic governance. We are the stability. Your species is chaotic. You cannot dictate terms. We do not dictate terms, Arbiter Vex, Eva countered instantly, demonstrating a preternatural awareness of the Krill political structure, gleaned from the fragmented data recovered from Thorne's final transmissions. We present an objective analysis of the current operational status. Your interrogation techniques failed to break Dr. Thorne's will, proving their inefficacy against our species' core psychological structure. Your subsequent military action validates the hypothesis that your Imperium relies on fear as its primary political solvent. We find both premises logically unsound. This was the core of the human enigma to the Krill. They were refusing the expected responses: fear, rage, surrender, and replacing them with a cold, dispassionate assessment of Krill operational flaws. What then do you offer as restitution, human captain? Vorlag finally demanded, his composure beginning to fray beneath the relentless pressure of their opponent's alien logic. If you reject our authority and refuse to yield to our inevitable superior force, what possible alternative path remains open to your fragile vessel? Eva's gaze shifted slightly, indicating a secondary screen that activated behind her on the bridge. This screen displayed a schematic of the Krill Third Fleet, but it was overlaid with vibrant, pulsing vectors tracing complex energy pathways. We offer two options, Krill Imperium. Option 1, you retract your fleet immediately, issue a formal acknowledgement of the ethical violation, and allow a neutral third party, a species we have already established communication protocols with, though you have not detected them, to mediate a reparations agreement based on the established value of cognitive sovereignty. This path leads to an immediate cessation of hostilities and the opening of diplomatic channels. A wave of skeptical murmuring swept through the conclave. A neutral third party whose existence they had not detected. It implied a level of deep space awareness they had completely missed. And option 2, Captain Rostova? Vorlag pressed, his internal fear spiking. He needed to understand the extremity of the alternative. Eva's expression did not change, but the light seemed to dim around her figure, focusing all attention solely on her words. Option 2 is simpler. We possess the capability to disable your entire fleet, not through Overwa. helming kinetic force, but through the manipulation of the inherent quantum entanglement within your primary reactor cores. Commander Jax has spent the last cycle mapping the residual resonance from your probe signatures. We know the exact sequence required to induce a cascade failure in your shielding matrix, rendering every vessel inert within moments. This action would not destroy your ships. It would merely stop them permanently within your current sector. Chen gasped softly on the bridge of the Odyssey. Jax had not programmed a disable sequence. He had programmed a self-destruction sequence that they could remotely trigger. Eva was bluffing with the possibility of incapacitation, knowing the Krill's deep-seated terror of stasis and the loss of control. The destructive potential, Captain, is irrelevant to the outcome, Vorlag stated, trying to regain control of the narrative. Inertia is stagnation. Stagnation is failure. You risk your own vessel for this display of defiance. We calculate the risk of our own systemic failure at 68% should we attempt option 2, Eva admitted, her calmness absolute. However, we calculate the risk of your Imperium suffering systemic instability should you continue this line of aggression at 92% within the next solar cycle, based on the documented fragility of your reliance on centralized dogma. We choose the 68% risk, Lord Triumvir. We possess the capacity to enforce our ethical boundary, even at the cost of our own existence. We are not driven by the preservation of the individual unit, but the preservation of the concept. The silence that followed was not the heavy anticipation of the Krill, but a terrifying, cold void where their arrogant certainty used to reside. They were facing a species that not only valued abstract concepts, principles, over survival, but possessed the calculated, precise means to enforce that valuation against an empire of superior mass and power. The concept of a species willing to commit collective suicide to defend an ethical stance was entirely alien, violating every known sociological model of expansionist empires. The Krill debate, now transmitted back to the conclave in real time, was internal chaos veiled in ritualistic stillness. Rylos, the scholar, was the first to break ranks, his voice trembling with intellectual awe and profound fear. Triumvir, the data regarding the quantum entanglement mapping, it is flawless. We ran our internal countermeasures against their theoretical vector. They possess the key. If they execute that sequence, our reactors will enter a zero-point state collapse, rendering every ship in the Third Fleet a frozen derelict within minutes. We cannot outrun the pulse. We cannot shield against a targeted quantum decoherence. Vex, the arbiter of justice, understood the spiritual implication instantly. They have not attacked. They have simply shown us the consequences of their core belief system. This is not warfare as we know it. This is the definition of a hard boundary. Vorlag remained fixed on the image of Rostova. He saw not a warrior, but an executor of cold, crystalline morality. The Krill operated on dominance. These humans operated on definitions. If the humans defined torture as an unacceptable act and possessed the means to make that definition a universal constant in that sector, then the Krill's definition of security was obsolete. And the third party? Vorlag demanded, focusing on the potential political fallout, the one thing that could truly destabilize the Imperium. Eva answered the question before the Krill sensors could even relay the query back to the Triumvir. She had anticipated the priority shift. The entity you did not detect is the Sol system's primary defense network, which we utilize for early warning and deep space data relay. They are not an empire, Triumvir. They are a distributed monitoring consciousness, billions of interconnected low-power nodes covering an area far exceeding your current understanding of localized FTL constraints. They are patient. They are observing your response to this negotiation. They have been cataloging your actions since the first probe encountered our vessel. This was the revelation that shattered the Krill perception of their isolated dominance. Humanity was not alone, and the allies they possessed operated on a scale of silent, pervasive observation that made the Krill fleet seem like a localized storm. We choose option 1, Vorlag stated, the words tasting like ash. The humiliation of yielding to a lesser species was immense, but the threat of systemic paralysis, confirmed by Rylos's frantic internal data, was absolute. The structural integrity of the Imperium could not withstand a publicized, technologically enforced defeat, especially one broadcast across the few open communication lines they maintained with border clients. Krill Imperium accepts the premise of ethical review. Vorlag announced, his voice strained to maintain its official resonance. Captain Rostova, we cease mobilization. We await the transmission of the mediated framework. Eva inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement, not deference. The framework will be transmitted immediately, triumvir. You will observe a temporary tactical withdrawal of the Third Fleet to a minimum safe observational distance, 1 light minute from the Odyssey, pending the arrival of the mediator. The tactical displays on the Krill ships shifted instantly. The massive kinetic formation began to dissolve, the warships reluctantly turning their vast hulls away from the small, defiant human vessel. The tension aboard the Odyssey did not dissipate. It merely transformed, hardening into the grim reality of diplomatic engagement with an ancient, wounded giant. The mediator arrived 3 standard days later. It was not a fleet, nor a single vessel of imposing size. It materialized near the observation zone as a single, perfect geometric form, a dodecahedron crafted from a material that seemed to absorb ambient starlight, rendering it simultaneously present and visually elusive. This entity, designated by humanity as the Veritas construct, was the entity Eva had referred to as the distributed monitoring consciousness. Krill protocols forbade interaction with any entity exhibiting non-bipedal, non-carbon-based sentience unless that entity possessed an established galactic treaty status. The Veritas construct possessed none of these markers, yet the Krill were compelled by the terms of their surrender, enforced by the quantum threat, to acknowledge its presence. Eva Rostova commanded the initial contact team, escorted by Jax and 3 security personnel equipped only with non-lethal sonic dampeners. They transitioned to the Krill flagship, the Iron Sepulchre, a vessel so large it contained localized weather patterns within its main hangar bays. The air within the Krill staging chamber was thick with ozone and the subtle, acrid scent of Krill distress. Triumvir Vorlag awaited them on the dais, flanked by Rylos and Vex. The Krill had shed their ceremonial battle armor for simple, dark diplomatic robes, a concession to visual non-aggression, but an offense to their ingrained tradition. Eva stepped onto the floor, her movements economical and deliberate. She did not approach the dais immediately. Instead, she addressed the Veritas construct, which remained hovering silently near the entrance of the chamber. Veritas, Eva projected, using the designated designation. We confirm the successful transmission of the Krill fleet's current disposition and the recording of the violation against Dr. Thorne. We request your assessment of the proposed restitution schedule. The construct did not transmit a verbal reply. Instead, the surface of the dodecahedron pulsed with complex internal light patterns, which were instantly translated by the Odyssey systems into a stream of dense, objective data points that scrolled across Eva's wrist-mounted display. Rylos, the scholar, monitored the data stream with frantic intensity. His multifaceted eyes widened as the translation completed. Triumvir, the construct's analysis, it confirms Captain Rostova's assessment of the cognitive damage sustained by Thorne. Furthermore, it calculates the resulting loss of scientific data potential at 4.7 exacycles. It has proposed a reparations schedule based on the economic output of the Krill sector Sigma for the next 50 standard years. Vorlag was aghast. 50 years? That is the equivalent of a century of labor for a single, insignificant biological unit. This is extortion disguised as jurisprudence. Eva turned to face Vorlag, her expression unwavering. It is not extortion, Triumvir. It is valuation. You valued Dr. Thorne's suffering as less than the cost of a single starship maintenance cycle. The Veritas construct, operating outside the political biases of localized empires, values his lost potential based on empirical projection. You may disagree with the valuation, but you cannot dispute the methodology. It is logic applied universally. Arbiter Vex stepped forward, attempting to regain philosophical footing. Captain Rostova, we recognize the inherent value of sentience. However, the Imperium operates under a system of necessary hierarchy. Lesser species must be managed to ensure the stability required for higher conceptual thought, which we, the Krill, embody. And what higher conceptual thought is served by the deliberate destruction of a mind seeking knowledge? Eva challenged. Your hierarchy is self-referential. It justifies its own cruelty by defining everything outside its structure as inherently less worthy of protection. This is the fatal flaw of all hegemonic structures. You create a philosophical justification for your own fear of the unknown. Jax added, his voice cutting through the diplomatic fog with the precise sharpness as of a calibrated probe. We have not brought weapons of war, triumvir. We have brought the mechanism of consequence. The Krill fleet remains immobilized at a distance that prevents any immediate aggression, yet remains close enough to witness the implementation of the resolution. We require a formal, recorded agreement on the reparations schedule, signed by the triumvirate and ratified by the central conclave within 1 Terran week. The tension in the chamber became almost unbearable. The Krill leadership was trapped. They could not attack without risking the total paralysis of their fleet, an act that would invite immediate opportunistic uprisings across their client states. They could not refuse the terms without confirming to the unseen, third party, the silent observer woven into the fabric of space, that they were fundamentally irrational actors unwilling to face the consequences of their actions. Vorlag signaled Rylos. Run the amortization models for Sector Sigma production against the construct's proposed timeline. Determine the true point of systemic collapse if we comply. Rylos worked rapidly, his neural net churning through the complexity. After several agonizing minutes, his output registered on the Krill visual interface. Triumvir, full compliance will result in a severe but manageable recession within the periphery administrative zones. We will survive. The political stability of the core worlds remains intact, provided this agreement is treated as a necessary, if humiliating, stabilization measure. Vorlag looked at Rostova, his expression unreadable beneath the thick chitin. You have forced us into an action that violates centuries of established precedents. You have done this without firing a single destructive shot. We have forced you to confront your own definition of power, triumvir, Eva corrected him. True power is not the capacity to destroy, but the capacity to define the rules of engagement and possess the will to enforce them impartially. We did not come here seeking conflict. We came here seeking accountability. We have cataloged your response. We now have the data we require. The agreement was drafted, signed, and ratified within the mandated timeframe. The Krill fleet, under the constant, silent surveillance of the Veritas construct, retreated slowly to the edge of the known Krill sphere of influence, taking with them the chilling realization that they had encountered a species whose threat was not kinetic, but conceptual. Humanity waged war not with energy beams, but with inescapable, cold logic. Weeks later, the Odyssey had been moved to the designated neutral zone, a nebula rich in unused energy fields, far from any established Krill territory, designated as the staging ground for the first reparations exchange. Eva Rostova sat alone in the observation lounge, studying the endless, shimmering gas clouds. The internal atmosphere of the ship was different now. The initial terror had been replaced by a profound, settled understanding of their own species' strange, formidable nature. Jax entered the lounge, carrying a data slate containing the final reconciliation report. Captain, the preliminary transfer of assets is complete. The Krill adhered strictly to the agreement. They are maintaining distance. They have not attempted contact, not even through low-level sensor sweeps. They are processing the defeat, Commander, Eva said, not looking up. They are recalibrating their entire understanding of interstellar dynamics based on the one data point they could not conquer, principle overriding survival instinct. We survived an encounter with an empire, Captain, through sheer, terrifying professionalism, Jax mused. We did not shout. We presented a logically insurmountable scenario that forced them to choose political survival over ideological pride. It was elegant. It was necessary, Eva countered. Humanity cannot afford the luxury of arrogance. We are young, our technology still nascent compared to true stellar powers. Our only advantage is our ability to define our own moral constants and adhere to them rigidly, even when illogical. It confuses the established order. The comms console chimed softly. It was the Veritas construct, initiating contact, not with the bridge, but directly to Eva's private terminal, bypassing standard operational protocols. Veritas, Eva acknowledged, accepting the connection. The visual was the same pulsing dodecahedron, but the light patterns were faster, more complex than before, patterns Jax's systems flagged as urgent structural shift. Captain Rostova, the translated stream flowed into her terminal. Your successful enforcement action against the Krill Imperium has been recorded and integrated into the primary matrix. Your species has successfully navigated the first major test of ethical sovereignty against a major expansionist power. Eva waited, sensing the transition point. This was not about the Krill. Anymore. We wish to convey supplementary data, the construct continued. The Krill were not the threat. They were a predictable variable within a larger, much older equation. Your use of quantum decoherence mapping, the threat you utilized, was known to us. In fact, it was cataloged in ancient archival data recovered from the precursor eras. Eva leaned forward, her calculated calm finally showing a hairline fracture. Precursor eras? What context are you providing, Veritas? The Krill are a young empire, Captain. They rose from systemic chaos approximately 10,000 cycles ago. They built their dominance on brute force kinetics and centralized resource control. They never developed the necessary cognitive leap to understand the implications of deeply entangled physics, viewing them only as sources of energy distortion. You, humanity, stumbled upon the necessary mathematical foundation through sheer, brute force ingenuity under duress. The construct paused, and the light patterns intensified until the dodecahedron seemed to vibrate at the edge of perception. The danger you averted with the Krill was not the Krill themselves. It was the attention you drew. When you threatened systemic, non-kinetic collapse across their entire fleet, you utilized a resonance frequency that was not indigenous to your current technological base. That frequency is an archival marker. It is a beacon, intentionally placed in the void by the last civilization to attempt galactic governance before the collapse. Eva felt a sudden, dizzying shift in perspective, the realization that the scope of their conflict had just expanded beyond the known galaxy. A beacon? What does it signal? It signals stability, but also violation, the Veritas construct explained, its data stream now carrying an almost mournful quality. It signals the presence of a species that has achieved rudimentary, yet effective mastery over quantum entanglement manipulation, without first passing the prerequisite ideological threshold established by the builders. In essence, you have broadcast your presence to entities who view the manipulation of subspace coherence as a privilege, reserved only for those who have achieved galactic consensus on ethical warfare. Jax burst into the room, drawn by the anomalous signal spike. He saw the readout, the chilling implications of the Veritas data stream. Captain, they're confirming that the Krill's fear was justified, but not because of us. They were afraid of what recognizing our capability would bring. What entities would recognize this signal, Veritas? Eva demanded, her voice gaining a sharp, urgent edge. The architects, the construct stated simply, the translation stark and final. They retreated beyond the known boundaries of this galactic cluster when the precursor wars destabilized the interdimensional pathways. They viewed the uncontrolled dissemination of quantum coherence manipulation as an existential threat to cosmic order. They have not been heard from for an epoch, until now. Your display of controlled force against the Krill was the equivalent of firing a flare into the deepest regions of the void. Eva stared at the image of the quiet, observant geometric shape. The war against the Krill had been a necessary, brutal defense of a single, fundamental human right, the right to exist without sanctioned agony. But that brutal defense had served as an unintentional, catastrophic advertisement. How long until they respond to the signal? Eva asked, the weight of an unknown, possibly infinite enemy settling upon her shoulders. The signal was broadcast approximately 4 rotations ago, relative to your species, timekeeping, the construct replied. Their response time, based on archived models of their deep field transit capabilities, is calculated to be within the next 90 standard cycles. Their approach will not involve diplomatic hails or territorial claims. It will involve establishing a sector-wide quarantine, a final solution to any species demonstrating uncontrolled technological escalation. Eva closed her eyes for a brief moment, absorbing the catastrophic scope of the revelation. They had beaten the local bully only to attract the attention of the cosmic executioner. The war with the Krill had been a trial by fire, forging a disciplined, ethically rigorous force from a volatile species. Now, they needed that forged strength for a battle that would decide the fate of all nascent sentience. Commander Jax, Eva opened her eyes, the terrifying calm returning, now layered with a deep, almost melancholic resolve. Recall all personnel to battle stations. Reroute all auxiliary power to long-range sensor array projection. We have 90 cycles to prepare for the arrival of a civilization that views the very act of our self-defense as a capital offense. She looked toward the view screen, where the distant, retreating shadow of the Krill fleet was barely visible, a small, contained threat now over. Shadowed by an unimaginable destiny. We taught the Krill a lesson in accountability, Eva stated, standing tall in the quiet confines of her small ship, the true scale of the universe suddenly revealed. Now, we must teach the architects that the right to define our own ethics is worth the entirety of existence. Humanity's war is only just beginning. The cinematic quiet of the lounge was broken only by the hum of systems spooling up for a conflict that spanned eons, against enemies whose definition of order was far more absolute and far more terrifying than the Krill's transient dominion. The universe had just become infinitely smaller and infinitely more dangerous for the species that dared to demand accountability.